Welcome to Echoes of Africa, where forgotten knowledge, hidden histories, and untold innovations of Africa come alive. From ancient empires to modern brilliance, we uncover the stories the world tried to erase. This is more than history, it's Africa's voice, echoing across time. November 1884, in a grand mansion on Wilhelmstrasse in Berlin, the leaders and diplomats of 14 European nations plus the United States gather at the behest of German Chancellor Otto von Bismarck, a master of European power politics. They assemble around a giant, newly drawn map of Africa, a continent of immense diversity, home to ancient kingdoms, complex societies, and 1,000 different languages. But in this room it is treated as a blank space, a prize to be claimed. Conspicuously absent are any Africans. No kings, no diplomats, no community leaders from the very lands being discussed are invited. Their voices, their history, their very existence are rendered irrelevant. In just 3 months, the future of an entire continent home to hundreds of millions will be decided by men who have never set foot there. The fates of generations to come will be sealed by the stroke of a pen on a piece of paper. Officially, the agenda is noble. The Berlin Conference, they claim, is about regulating trade and ensuring free navigation along the Congo and Niger rivers. It's about stamping out the internal slave trade and bringing the supposed benefits of the 3 C's, yea, commerce, Christianity, and civilization, to the African people. They speak of humanitarian ideals and benevolent civilizing missions, painting a picture of enlightened guardianship over a dark continent. But beneath the veneer of polished speeches and diplomatic courtesies lies a far more cynical reality. This conference is a preemptive strike designed to manage the escalating scramble for Africa and prevent it from igniting a full-blown European war. Hidden agendas fester, raw geopolitics, bitter national rivalries, and a web of secret deals. The true prize isn't just trade routes, it's the vast untapped resources of a continent, rubber, diamonds, copper, gold. It's about securing strategic territory and national prestige in a rapidly changing world. The conference will lay down the rules for conquest, creating a twisted legal framework to legitimize the carving up of Africa into colonies, protectorates, and spheres of influence. The lines they draw, often in complete ignorance of the ethnic, linguistic, and cultural realities on the ground, will become the artificial borders of modern African nations, sowing the seeds of future conflict. This was the blueprint for a long-term strategy to keep Africa politically fragmented, economically exploitable, and strategically dependent, a pattern of external influence and internal division that continues to shape global politics even today. This is the untold story of the Berlin Conference, a story not of discovery, but of division, a moment in history where an entire continent was not explored, it was dissected. To understand why the world's most powerful nations gathered in Berlin in 1884, we must first look at the world that created the need for such a conference. By the late 19th century, Europe was in the throes of the Second Industrial Revolution, a period of explosive technological and economic change. Great Britain, the early leader, was now rivaled by a newly unified and ambitious Germany, a rapidly advancing France, and even smaller nations like Belgium. This new industrial world was built on a relentless principle: perpetual growth, a growth that depended entirely on a constant, ever-increasing supply of raw materials. This industrial behemoth had an insatiable appetite. European powers needed vast quantities of raw materials that were either scarce or non-existent at home. They needed rubber for factory belts and the tires of new bicycles and automobiles. They needed palm oil as a crucial lubricant for their machines. They needed copper for the telegraph cables wiring the world and for the dynamos of the new electrical age. And, of course, they needed cotton for their textile mills, gold to back their currencies, and diamonds for industry and opulence. And where could these resources be found in seemingly limitless abundance? The eyes of Europe turned to Africa. For centuries, European contact was largely confined to coastal trading posts, the continent's interior often labelled unexplored. But by the 1870s, that was rapidly changing. Explorers funded by geographical societies, industrialists or ambitious monarchs like Belgium's King Leopold II penetrated the continent's heart. Their missions, framed as scientific and humanitarian, also served a pragmatic purpose. Their published journals were filled with detailed accounts of the continent's incredible wealth. Geological surveys noted iron ore, vast copper deposits and diamonds. The dark continent was being rebranded as a treasure chest waiting to be unlocked. This revelation coincided with a period of deep economic anxiety. The Long Depression, which began in 1873, saw prices and profits fall, creating intense competition. Economists warned that without new cheap sources of raw materials and new markets, Europe's factories would grind to a halt, risking social unrest. Africa offered the perfect two-part solution. It was a source of materials, and it represented vast new captive markets. Over 100 million potential consumers for the surplus of European factories, textiles, alcohol, firearms, and cheap manufactured goods. Beyond economics, an even more potent force was at play: nationalism. In the late 19th century, national prestige was measured in square miles of colonial territory. An empire was the ultimate status symbol. Great Britain and France had vast global empires. A newly unified Germany felt immense pressure to claim its place in the sun. This rivalry created a domino effect. One nation's claim in Africa sparked a panicked rush by others to stake their own. Geopolitically, Africa's coastlines and its great rivers, the Congo and the Niger, meant control over global shipping routes and gateways to the continent's interior. The scramble for Africa was therefore not a sudden accident. It was the inevitable outcome of a perfect storm: industrial hunger, economic anxiety, scientific discovery, and ruthless geopolitical competition. The stage was set for a confrontation. To avoid a war between the European powers themselves, a new set of rules for the plunder was needed. In the winter of 1884, the political center of the world shifted to Berlin. Here, German Chancellor Otto von Bismarck convened a conference that would change the face of a continent. Bismarck, the Iron Chancellor, was famously cautious about overseas expansion, but he saw the escalating rivalries over African territory as a threat to European peace. By positioning himself as the honest broker, he could manage these tensions and simultaneously stake Germany's claim as a new global power, all under the guise of international cooperation. For 3 months, delegates from 14 nations gathered. The major powers, Britain, France, and Germany, drove the agenda, joined by established colonial players like Portugal and ambitious newcomers like Italy and Belgium's King Leopold II. Even the United States and the Ottoman Empire were present. But as the delegates sat around a massive map of Africa, a continent they knew so little about, there was a glaring, deliberate omission. Not a single African was present. No king, no chief, no diplomat from the vast and complex societies of the continent was invited to the table where their fate was being decided. Powerful, organized states like the Sokoto Caliphate, the Buganda Kingdom, and the ancient Ethiopian Empire were rendered invisible, their sovereignty simply erased from the discussion. The conference's public pronouncements, codified in the Berlin General Act, were draped in the language of high-minded morality. The primary stated goal was humanitarian, to end the slave trade in the African interior, a noble cause that painted the colonizers as liberators. Secondly, they pledged to guarantee free trade along the Congo and Niger rivers, promising an open market for all European nations. Finally, and most critically, they established the principle of effective occupation. So to claim a piece of Africa, a nation now had to demonstrate real control on the ground by raising a flag and establishing an administration. This rule, intended to prevent disputes, instead lit the fuse for the scramble for Africa. A frantic race to plant flags and claim territory. All of this was wrapped in the paternalistic ideology of a civilizing mission, the belief that Europe had a duty to bring Christianity and Western governance to supposedly backward peoples. But this polished rhetoric was a smokescreen for the raw calculations of power and profit. The hidden motives were starkly geopolitical. The most cunning player was Belgium's King Leopold II. He had masterfully convinced the world his interest in the Congo was purely philanthropic. But behind the facade of his humanitarian associations, he was carving out a personal empire the size of Western Europe. The Congo Free State was not a Belgian colony, but Leopold's private property, and he would exploit its rubber and ivory with a level of brutality that would lead to the deaths of millions. For the major powers, it was a strategic chess match. Britain was obsessed with securing the route to India, which meant controlling Egypt and the Suez Canal. France, its main rival, was pushing eastward from Senegal, dreaming of an empire from the Atlantic to the Red Sea. Germany, the latecomer, demanded its place in the sun, using the conference to legitimize its new colonies and announce its arrival on the world stage. Perhaps the most cynical strategy was the map-making itself. The borders drawn in Berlin were almost entirely arbitrary, drawn with rulers on maps in Europe, ignoring the human geography on the ground. These new lines sliced through established kingdoms and cultural groups. The Bakongo people were split between 3 different colonial powers. The Somali were divided among 4. This was not an accident. It was a deliberate strategy of divide and rule. By creating colonies with disparate, often rival ethnic groups, the European powers made unified resistance more difficult. The Berlin Conference did not start the colonization of Africa, but it legitimized and accelerated it, replacing informal influence with direct rule. It established the blueprint for the partition of a continent by outsiders, for outsiders, setting in motion a century of exploitation and conflict whose consequences are still felt today. Before the conference, European powers had quietly sent explorers, scientists and cartographers into Africa. Men like Henry Morton Stanley mapped rivers, recorded mineral wealth, and reported back not for science alone, but for conquest. geological societies in London, Paris, and Berlin produced confidential reports on Africa's resource potential. Many of these were restricted, never meant for public eyes. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe for more hidden histories and untold truths from Africa and beyond. Example: British archives reveal secret surveys of West African oil palms in the 1870s, decades before official colonization. What looked like exploration was in fact reconnaissance, intelligence gathering for empire. Artificial borders cut across ancient kingdoms and ethnic groups. The Somali people were split between 5 different colonies. The Yoruba, Hausa, and Ashanti kingdoms were fragmented. This ensured Africa would emerge divided, unable to mount unified resistance. Europe did not just conquer Africa's land, it engineered Africa's fragmentation, creating states too weak to resist, and divisions that still fuel conflict today. Classified correspondence shows British officials deliberately designed Nigeria's borders to unbalance Muslim North and Christian South, creating permanent tension. The Berlin Conference ended in 1885, but its effects never ended. When independence came in the mid-20th century, Africa inherited colonial borders, colonial economies, and colonial dependence. Europe kept control through companies, mining giants, oil firms, and banks. New tools of influence: IMF loans, debt traps, military bases, and political interference. Today, the same strategic resources, cobalt in Congo, uranium in Niger, oil in Nigeria, are critical for Europe's energy and technology. The scramble never ended. It simply changed its language from conquest to contracts. The Berlin Conference was not just a meeting. It was the beginning of a system designed to keep Africa divided, dependent, and exploited. The official reasons, trade, peace, civilization, were a mask. The hidden motives, resources, power, and control were the reality. And the legacy continues. Every conflict over artificial borders, every debt crisis, every resource extraction deal, they all trace their roots back to Berlin, 1884. Understanding this hidden history is not about blame, it is about truth and reclaiming the narrative of Africa's past, present, and future. As the first rays of an African sunrise break across the land, across a vibrant, animated landscape, the shadows of the past begin to recede. Our story continues, not just in history books, but in every step toward unity, truth, and reclaiming the future. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the hidden script of Africa's past. If you found this story eye-opening, don't forget to subscribe and join our community. Tap the bell icon to stay updated on our next deep dive. Let's keep the conversation alive and rewrite the narrative together.